Well, it's so nice to talk with you.
It's
this
nice to talk to
evening.
you.
I wanted to start first by reading your bio, and then
Sure.
we can get into conversation.
Wonderful.
All right. So, Jamele Wright Sr., at the age of 22, moved with his family to Atlanta, Georgia. And while raising a family, he produced art, jazz, and poetry events throughout Atlanta. Though realizing that there are many young artists not being represented, he started a gallery called Neo-Renaissance Art House. After curating the gallery for over a year, he was inspired to pursue his own artistic career, and after a number of solo and group exhibitions, he pursued his own, he graduated, from Georgia State University with a BA in art history, and later he got his MFA from the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. He's completed numerous residencies at MassMocha, Vermont Studio Center, as well as the Gibbs Museum, and he currently maintains his practice in Atlanta, Georgia. All right, well, thank you. I think my first question would be, what was the basis of your art practice? So what were your inspirations? Who do you look to?
So the basis of my practice is around the Nikisi pieces of the Congo, the power items of the Congo, where they're putting nails in them. Like, that was where I began to shift my practice. In my early part of, I had a professor in undergrad, Professor Roche, who taught, a non-Western art class, non-Western survey. So, and I saw the Nikisi piece, and I automatically connected to it. And what I liked the most about it was the color, the shape. I liked the meaning behind it, the narrative of how the community gathered around the piece, how the nails impacted the way that we felt. And although most people would think of those nails as a violent thing, they were actually a thing that encouraged the engagement of the community. I also liked the colors, and sometimes the bright colors of Nikisi pieces. They would wrap fabric around them. I like the symbolism of the mirrors in the eyes and how they're a reflection of us, and the mirror in the belly, which is a reflection of the soul. And I love the fact that it was handmade. And I never really thought about it that way, but that really is like everything in my practice.
Right.
It really is about creating these power items, these like the almost magical items, and creating things that really engage the community.
Yeah, so I feel like this is really connected not only to like traditional African art that we may think of, but also the importance of labor within abstract expressionist artists. And they were so known for being so gestural and their work being laborious. So do you feel like you're not only calling to this history of African ritual, but also to the ABEX movement?
Well, I think that I believe that the African art kind of blends into us as African American, right? And the idea of abstraction, even when Matisse and Picasso are referring to these masks, and Magellini, like all those artists that were referring to those masks, they're bringing that Africanness in. So when we talk about what I have begun discussing, which is Black abstraction, the idea of gesture and movement is just, I don't know, almost like a minimalizing the gesture and the movement. So like if you were to take the lines that were created through kente cloth, right? Which is a line that is created through the weaving of the fabric, and then move that into the hand gesture, into the hand and the brush strokes, then you're seeing some of those same things. You can look at Jack Whitten and see where he has moved upon canvas, which is a fabric, and moved the paint across it, causing this kind of blending of color, but also creating this larger gesture, in the same way that you are looking at dyeing techniques, or you're looking at they also do a body painting in parts of Africa as well, and I can't think of what it's called right now. But you're doing those same type of things, like the way that Africans will deal with fabric. As you can see a lot of those same gestures created in Black abstraction. So I'm looking at people like Al Loving, who started off doing geometric abstraction, but then began taking some of his older paintings and cutting them apart and dyeing them and then sewing them back together in these forms, like breaking that form. Oftentimes people like to compare me to Sam Gilliam, and he's using that kind of drop cloth as well, and he's allowing the viewer or allowing the curators to have agency with the work so they can put it the way they want to. I kind of claim my agency, and there's a certain way that I want things to be. And then I'm looking at, like, for this body of work, I was looking like at William T. Williams, Franz Klein. I see the work. He did these, Kith Nolan. So I'm looking at a lot of those kind of ideas, but I'm also thinking about, like, how do you minimalize some of the ideas? Like, how do you take something that's really massive and make it, like, just hit it, right? So that it spans. You know, sometimes, like, if you look at a waterway, you know, it's, you know, it may appear small, but if you take a pebble and throw it in there, then you really see, like, the depth, but you also see, like, how it spreads apart, how that line spreads apart. So I'm trying to sometimes be that kind of like pebble.
I guess when I think about Sam Gilliam's work and the way he's discussed, there's like this the missing of like body, and I think you pick up on that. So can you talk about the ways that you almost, it feels like you see your works as like people, they have a presence, they are a shape, and they take like some sort of like bodily shape.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times people, they get that from the work, and I can, the work, I believe, I would rather say that the work has a presence, right, rather than a body per se.
Right.
But then if I go back to what I was saying earlier about the Kizzy pieces, they are in the forms of bodies, right? I think where most people get that idea is because I'm using textile, and because textile is often referenced for the body, then there's the connection that this is referencing body. I like to think of them as graffiti in space sometimes. You know, I feel like I'm painting on the air, especially with these pieces. And then I do these birdhouses that are in Montgomery, Alabama, and those are elevated. I reference a lot of hip hop as a culture and as an idea, and not trying to hit directly into, like, I don't try to reference the music as much as sometimes the art and some of the concepts and ideas of hip hop. But I'm also thinking about landscapes. Right. So that's why you would sometimes think of them as embodying. So I'm thinking about like Robert Duncanson and Edward Bannister, who are African American landscape artists, but also like William T. J.W. Turner, who I love. And I recently found Albert Bernstein, I think his name is. Yeah, he's from Germany, and really thinking about the idea of something expanding, like just growing, you know.
Right. So I think my follow-up question to that would be, where do you see your work in relationship to Blackness? So if I were, as someone who's quite interested in body and surveillance, when I look at your work, I see it as almost like pseudo-portraiture, and
Right.
you're making Blackness have this presence. And I would argue that Black abstract expressionists were doing this because they weren't forefront about their identities, right? So do you see that? And then when you mention rap music and your work in relationship to that, they were doing kind of the same thing. They were making portraits of themselves through their work, and they became so known by region and by sound and by aesthetic. So do you see your work kind of in that way?
So that is always the question when it comes to being Black as an artist. I remember I was talking to this one young lady when I was doing studio visits, and she asked me, how do I get around being Black? Like, how do I deal with the Black question when it comes to my work? And I said, well, my name is Jamele. Like, I can't get away from being Black. If my name was like, you know, Jim or John or something like that, then, you know, I could probably play it off a little bit better, but I can't. I actually I push all the way into it, right? And then when I walk around, I'm a big Black man. Like, I'm not 4'9" and, you know, and wear size 29. I wear size 42. I'm like 6 feet almost, you know, so, almost. And, you know, I'm like probably 150 pounds bigger than I was in high school. So there's no way I can get away from being Black. I actually just push through it and I'm making the work to reference Blackness. But the Black experience is within America. I'm not saying that, and I say this in this way only because I have friends that are Caribbean. I've had friends that are from Africa. I've had friends that are from different parts of the globe where there are also brown people. But I would locate the Black experience is here, meaning that to be a Black abstractionist, I'm referencing Black Americanness, right? I'm referencing the land, and like Jack Whitten is from Alabama, Michi Miko, Alabama, Lonnie Holly, and I think the greatest artist of all time, Thornton Dahl, they're all from Alabama, and they all have put their hands in the soil there. So I think that like my Blackness isn't necessarily said because it's just woven in, if I could use that pun for being a textile artist, right? So yes, I think that as much as I can say, like if the question was, does my work deal with Blackness? Well, of course it does, right. Because I'm Black. But is it innately Black, or is it the thing that Black people expect for me to make? No, it's not that. Right. But if you're talking to another Black abstractionist, they would think that it's exceptionally Black, right? But our ideas of what Black people make, ideas of like a lot of portraiture or craft, and I think that I kind of skate around that a little bit and bring it into abstraction, like by using textile. I kind of play with the idea of craft. People think of them as a lot of the things I do as quilts, but I call it sampling. I don't call them quilts. My grandmother was a quilter, so I have a lot of respect for quilting. So I kind of play with this idea of craft at times and then bring it into abstraction. Right. I like to use red clay. I like to use the dirt and add that into the work because I think that it's really important. You know, Maya Angelou said that the reason why she believed that African Americans, when they go north, start going start going crazy is because they detach themselves from the land. They get moved to concrete. They get moved to high rises. So they're no longer in touch with the land. So because of that, they start to, they lose their connection, right? And so I'm always trying to maintain that connection. That was a very long answer for.
No, I think that's great. And so now you bring me to the question of sampling and your reference back to rap music. Do you see those kind of in connection with each other? And I think I also think about your playlist that goes with the Brown series of works, and they're songs that I know to be used in samples and sampled so much within rap music.
Right.
So is that kind of intentional?
Yes, because I like being an art historian. I love research, so I love hearing a song and then knowing where the sample comes from. And I love enjoying that song that it was sampled from. Because I love the way it makes me, like some people get disappointed when they hear the sample and then the rap doesn't come. I actually kind of enjoy it because it kind of like, it reconnects me to the thing that began, right?
Me too.
So I wouldn't say that I'm as connected with rap music as I am connected with hip hop.
And you see the two as different.
Well, KRS-One says rap is something we do, hip hop is something we live. So I live hip hop. Rap is just a part of that. But graffiti is a part of that. Breakdancing is a part of that. And now there's theory that supports these ideas. DJing is part of that. I can't forget the 4 pillars of hip hop, right? But in these things, so like, if you think of like Grandmaster Flash and what he was doing to create the break beat, like, well, DJ Hurt created the break beat, but to have the continuous loop is what Grandmaster Flash did. And the fact that this guy was a scientist, he had to find the right turntable, he had to find the right electronic equipment in order to make it do that. And I think that oftentimes that's not credited to him as, we credit him as doing music, but he's actually like, you know, should have a degree in electrical engineering, right? Because he was able to put this system together that then creates that, right? And then you have Grandmaster Theodore, Grand Wizard Theodore, who then invented the scratch. So like all these things have to happen in order for this music thing to happen that we know now. And it was happening within a few years, and now it's happening over 50 years, right? So, but the graffiti, man, the graffiti was crazy, right? The graffiti, man, like.
I think a lot about early graffiti and like, what is his name, Cornbread.
Right.
It was more about political statement. And there was almost a simplicity to it, but the act was more important. I'm doing this rogue,
right?
You know,
like in the movie Wild Style, and those guys were pioneers, man. They called themselves outlaws because they were out here doing this thing. But really, like when you look at someone like Rem LZ, who was really friends with Basquiat and Donde and Futura, and like you look at those guys, and like I personally am a huge fan of Rem LZ, because Rem LZ not only did graffiti art, not only did graffiti on walls, but then he did paintings, and then he did performance art. He made sculptures, and then he created costumes, and he walked around these costumes. So I believe that he really elevated the art in a way. He like took it from the wall in the same way that I see that these pieces are taking from the wall and into space, right? Into having their own presence. So I say that in that the graffiti using color, using line, using form, and you think of like abstraction, and the real separation is just the figure. So we're using something that's representational. They're using graffiti is representational, whereas the abstraction is happening at the same time, is non-representational. But if you look at the gesture, like sometimes what I miss being in the studio is just doing this. Mm-hmm. Just the way I move my hand when I'm painting. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's all I'm missing. Mm-hmm. I look at a Rothko and I'm like, man, look at the way he's moving his hand, like that mm-hmm. exercise of moving your hand like that, mm-hmm. right? Like those kind of things. Mm-hmm. In this way, like sewing it and putting it on the wall and then taking it down and sewing it some more and then putting it on the wall and sewing it some more. Like all those kind of athletic things are the same thing that's happening in graffiti when you think about, you know, again, Jack Whitten, when he's using the developer and he's moving that huge piece of equipment that he developed across the surface, but he's developed the floor too. He made the floor perfectly even before he could even do like all those things. The graffiti, man. You know, and then you think about the dance and that the movement of the body, like breakdancing, the movement of the body. And now look at what's happened to breakdancing. Like every year they have a world championship. No, on Red Bull. I'm not talking about the Olympics, but Red Bull.
I do think that hip hop and rap music is in an odd moment. I have this conversation with a friend and colleague all the time where we feel like it's, as it began as a subculture, it's reached capital P popular culture. Right. And in order for it to become a subculture again, it needs to like die a little. It needs to leave and come back a little more revitalized, regain that counterculture, subculture label.
But I think that, so in response to that, I would say that like reclaiming Black abstraction, I think is a way of creating this other subculture again, right? So, so like creating the term Black abstraction is not to separate myself from abstract expressionism, but it is to say that there's something indicative to what these people are doing that's slightly different than what these people have been doing. And that really comes from the fact that I eat collard greens, or I eat ribs with barbecue sauce, or I eat macaroni and cheese, or I eat, you know, I put cornbread in my black eyed peas. Like, it's not saying that they don't do the same thing. It's just the way that it's served, you know?
So do you see your work as inherently Southern? Another kind of interesting phenomena, I think, is to think about all Black people as Southern. And these people that have made it up north were really just products of the Great Migration. So still, it has that Southernness. So do you see your work as almost a Southern aspect? So when you talk about soul food and the creation of a culture, a food culture that comes from that, from the South, from making something out of nothing, like where?
Yeah, but I mean, like, if you're going to talk about that, we could also talk about Sun Ra, who's from Alabama. We could talk about, you know, Miles Davis, who's people from Mississippi. We could talk about John Coltrane, who's people from South Carolina. You know, so we can go to music, or we can go to the South, or, you know, a lot of the beginning of hip hop actually comes from the Caribbean. You know, so I wouldn't necessarily locate it as just being Southern. The Great Migration is probably one of the, is considered the largest migration, willing migration of any people on the earth ever. So, you know, so to say that is more about how the people move and what we've collected as we moved, right? So like growing up in Dayton, Ohio, you know, the idea of the South was something I did in the summertime, did in the springtime. My grandparents, you know, one of my grandparents lived in Alabama, in Birmingham. My mother's mother lived in Columbus, Ohio. So it was always these things. Now the food we can say the food is indicative to there, but then we could even go and say, you know, like the rice that South Carolina is known for, that golden rice, is actually from Africa. They brought it over in their hair. The collard greens is something they brought over in their hair. Yams is something they brought over in their hair. So like, is it the South, or is it indicative of a people who were migrating, who are being migrated unwillingly,
Back
right?
to the origins of
Right.
Black Americanness.
Right. So the ideas are not as, and not going against anything you're saying, but they're not as simple as just saying that they are Southern when I have grown up in Ohio where they birthed the funk. And then I lived in New York for 2 years and got to see graffiti every day. And my parents drove us from Dayton, Ohio to California for 4 days and then drove us back home. And I've been back and forth, by train, by plane as well. And seeing this country, and over the last couple of years being able to go to residencies in Vermont and Golden in New York, and being in New York for those 2 years and actually driving up there, right? So seeing the land and seeing this land that is America, and thinking to myself, like, I don't understand why Americans can be so mad when we live in such a beautiful place. Go outside, get off your computer, look around. I mean, you live in a beautiful, beautiful place. Driving through the Adirondacks was absolutely stunning. I did it at 11 o'clock in the morning. And if you saw the sun, like the way the color of the sun, that blueness early in the morning there, the fog on my right-hand side, like in California, like the plane getting ready to touch down and the sun being a color I didn't know the sun was that gold. Like I didn't understand why they called it the golden sun out there, right? And then I was talking yesterday about the grass in Vermont. Like I've never seen that kind of green, right? So to say like, is it Southernness or is it me responding to the color that is around me and me using the things within our time to create the narrative, but you already know it, right? So like, it's no longer up to me to tell you who I am, because you can get a book for that, but the work, stand in front of the work. What does the work tell you? Like me telling you something, I mean, you could tell a hip hop song without them rapping. You could tell hip hop jazz without them rapping. Jazz without the sound. The thing is like to stand in front of the work. And that's what I'm asking people to do. Just stand in front of the work. What does the work tell you?
Well, I think that's a great segue for us to begin our gallery tour.
Okay.
And you can give us a chat and talk specifically about this series and this body of work with examples and being able to stand in front of these pieces.
Yeah.